Good morning and welcome, everybody. Very glad that you joined us for this webinar on key best trends in the EU and UK markets. My name is Daniel Mahevkar. I'm the co-head of the Energy, Natural Resources and Sustainability group within Fieldfisher, and it's my pleasure to guide you through this webinar. We have colleagues here in the webinar from Fieldfisher, from Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and UK, and we are happy to give you some insights on the BESS market in Europe. The webinar is based on our BESS thought leadership piece that we recently published, which brings together 11 countries, insights from 11 countries, from colleagues from Fieldfisher across the network, with the very interesting aspects on the BESS market within Europe. Should you have any questions, please pop it into the notes section, and we'll come to it later on. Just a short introduction. As said, this webinar covers topics outlined in our recent BESS report, and it's aimed at investors, developers, operators, policymakers, and of course also new market entrants which are interested in the BESS market of Europe and the UK. A short overview, what are we talking about today? First of all, we will talk about market maturity and growth trends in the BESS markets. Of course, it's a very hot market at the moment within Europe, a little bit different from country to country, but again, one of the fastest growing markets in the energy sector at the moment. We will talk about contracting models, financing trends, policy approaches and drivers, which of course is one of the main drivers in energy crisis times, geopolitical crisis times, with problems with supply of oil and gas. Electricity becomes even more important. We will talk about barriers to the development and the growth of the BESS sector. Of course, that is one of the most imminent topics. From an operational and from a planning side, of course, permitting and planning trends is also very interesting to the audience, and we'll cover those. We will talk about the importance of co-location, especially in a couple of countries where we are. We touch upon there's a growth of litigation, especially related to grid connection at the currently. And of course, we will also talk a topic where Fieldfisher is very strong in advising at. It's the whole topic about data security, cyber risks, and the respective regulation. And we have colleagues in the webinar which are specialists in that area. What we've done in our report, and I think that is a very good overview that I would like to start with, we developed the maturity index, which is aiming at investors, but also developers, if they think about which countries are more relevant in deploying their efforts, in deploying their means. We've looked at the 11 countries where we've contributed to the report from Fieldfisher colleagues and categorized from our view the major aspects as headlines and gave them a very neat color scheme as a traffic light. Red is, of course, difficult. Green is right on track and good to handle. As you can see, we have also included 2030 pipeline targets in this maturity index. And there you'll see that the targets are, of course, different from country to country, but in some countries are more ambitious than others. But we're talking here about gigawatt, and that is by itself always a big number. The UK itself has a huge target, but also other issues. European jurisdictions like Germany, Spain, and Italy are very ambitious in developing their BESS capacity until 2030. And this, of course, brings a lot of new business and also investment. We've also covered on the regulation. Green is where there is regulation, or then orange is where regulation is developing. Red is where we are still before having substantive regulation. I would, we've put here green for Germany. I would doubt it at the moment a little bit, but since we've developed the report, there have been a lot of developments and changes in the regulatory framework, and we've seen a lot of insecurity there. Um, We've of course looked at grid connection, one of the most imminent topics currently in the whole business. And unfortunately, grid connection is not green in any of the jurisdictions we've looked at because that's one of the bottlenecks, and we'll touch upon that later on. But of course, there are some countries, especially those where we see a very significant raise in new capacity that have bigger issues than others. Um, then investor interest. There are some markets from our experience and from our practice, from our advice, which are more hot than other markets. And this is, we've kind of colored that here. It's no, I've already touched on it. Germany and Spain are important markets. UK with the huge growth targets is of course also one, but we've also seen a lot of development in Austria here, and we've last year also had a BESS event in our Vienna office, which was very well attended and created a lot of interest. Um, We've also looked at state and local incentives for BESS projects and highlighted here where there are such state or local incentives. It's of course interesting for investors if they can rely on certain aids in their financial models. And then we've looked at cybersecurity development in regulation. And I think Michael will later on say a few things about that. First of all, growth trends. It's an enormous number. We are talking about doubling of capacity by 2035 of 132 gigawatt in total. We are at the moment around 60, a little bit more than 60 gigawatt in the whole of Europe. So that's an enormous task. It's an enormous amount of capacity that investors want and developers want to add here. At current costs of those projects, we are talking about 68 billion euro of investment within Europe in the BESS industry alone. Those are incredible numbers. Um, it is expected that over half of the growth will take place in Spain, Italy, and Germany, and therefore, for this essential markets, we also have the colleagues in this webinar who can talk about it. Um, of course, all other European jurisdictions are also interesting. And if you've any specific questions, I would like to highlight here any European country, also to people which are not in this webinar, please let us know. We're happy to introduce you to the right colleagues within our Fieldfisher network or even beyond that. That can help you with your questions, legal questions, and others around the BESS market. Co-location BESS with renewable assets can increase revenue significantly. Why is that the case? We have currently significant negative pricing times within Europe because of PV times when there is too much PV electricity created in the grid, and therefore co-located BESS projects can help a lot with the financial situation there, with the financial model in those kind of projects. I would even dare to say that currently, especially in Germany, most of the PV projects which get developed at the moment at least get permitted with a co-located BESS to open any options further on. We have initial reliefs and subsidies which have an end date at the moment. There's been a lot of discussions around the relief from grid fees, Germany, where there's been a lot of back and forth, and that's also true for other countries, and therefore developers aim to capture those benefits, of course. They could mean a very significant impact on the financial situation of the BESS projects, and therefore it's kind of also a little bit of a race to capture those subsidies which come to an end 2027, 2029. They're different times depending on the specific country. Um, then further aspect of energy supply security due to geopolitical crisis. I've already touched on that. We're seeing the war in Iran. We're seeing the problems of delivering gas and oil. Um, and I think at the moment it's just not, it's also a security asset to develop reliability in their own country on their own energy supply, where BESS projects can help a lot with. What is accelerating growth? What is stalling growth? First of all, regulatory reforms. We're seeing regulation developed in various countries. It's not where we want it to be yet. There are still quite some way to go from the regulator, but we're seeing first rules that you can rely on, be it grid access, be in other situations. Um, Due to the fact that I mentioned and the importance of the BESS market for energy supply, there's an increased investor commitment. We see a lot of interest in European markets in the BESS industry. A lot of also external foreign investors coming into Europe and are interested about the BESS market. We have rising electricity demands. We have the age of AI developing, where we need data centers, where 4% of the, for example, in Germany, of the energy production is already consumed by data centers only. And to guarantee energy supply here, electricity supply here, and also to stabilize it, BESS is necessary. We have further decarbonization carbon targets, which are also linked to incentives. That is still true even after some geopolitical changes, especially triggered from the USA. And we have tech advance as improved safety and of course cut costs. We had a significant fall of OPEX, and prices are still coming down with regard to batteries. And we have a rise of bankability. We see more and more projects, also project financed, big tolling situations, but also merchant cases which receive bankability when investors getting when banks getting more comfortable with the new asset class BESS. Then we have stalling growth, of course. Political instability is always a trigger for that, and regulatory challenges or regulatory insecurities. Slow permitting is an issue. We're still seeing long times for permitting processes. Grid congestions, I think I've touched upon it. It's by far the biggest issue in all European countries that we are seeing. And the inadequate regulations which do not address grid congestions. So we're seeing slight changes, slight improvements, but still grid connection and the whole topic around this, there are still regulations to come which give a transparent and clear procedure. There are market saturation risks. Nobody really knows when that will kick in. There are some estimates based also, for example, on the situation in the UK, which is a couple of years in front of the rest of Europe. But the numbers I hear is that the next 5 or 6 years should be okay. Then market saturation could kill parts of the revenue streams. What kind of revenue models do we see? We see, first of all, tolling agreements, common in UK, Italy, Germany, and Belgium. Tolling agreements is, of course, you rent out the capacity of your BESS projects to the off-taker, which then can make use of it. It gives you a certain and controllable cash flow, which is a project finance enabler, guarantees cash flow, revenue certainty, but which of course takes away from you all the upside from the merchant case, which is at least in the first years quite significant or expected to be quite significant in the European countries. Then we also have revenue stacking models. What is that? That is using different ways of receiving or different ways of monetizing your BESS project. It's common in Italy, Belgium, and Germany, also other countries. There are, for example, auction formats in which the BESS capacity can participate. You have short-term and long-term predictable revenues, but of course they are subject to market changes. But you have various different streams of revenues. So the volatility is also a little bit balanced by those kind of different revenue streams. And we also see that from time to time combined with tolling, to have a certain amount of the capacity tolled to the off-taker and remain a certain amount of capacity to get some market premium on that and to use revenue stacking in that regard. Often optimizers are introduced to cover those services and to make the best out of it. Then, of course, we have capacity emergent revenues. We're talking about selling the capacity at the market, using the BESS to buy electricity when it has negative prices or is very cheap, and then give it back to the market when it's expensive or in expensive times. We see that we see also a mixture of intraday, intraday, next day trading, and also auxiliary services that BESS can be used for. So that's often the mix which optimizers apply. And this gives you, of course, the highest possible upside, but also less predictability of cash flows. Revenues and financing trends insights. What do we see? We see time limited grid fee waivers currently, both in Belgium until 2027 and in Germany 2029. This, of course, evidenced first mover advantage in these markets. In Germany, some of you might know that there is currently a huge discussion going on. There was this unclear communication if they would retroactively kill those grid fee waivers. We now have a situation, at least in the last publication, that until we have a new regulation in place, which will not come before 2027, it will depend on if the FID has taken place for the BESS, then it will benefit from the grid waivers until 2029. But there is a lot of pressure for the to participate here, at least in Germany, to the FID line. We've also published in parallel something on that specific topic. Securing grid access early, it's of course a topic, and that has been in many countries first come, first serve recently, which didn't work out quite well. And I expect that a lot of those projects will eventually not take place, which have been part of that first wave of grid access reservation, grid capacity reservation. But we are seeing development here. We've seen, for example, in a couple of countries where it depends on the actual development of the project, if they qualify for grid access, for grid capacity or not. We've seen here a new paper on the TSO level, for example, in Germany, where also this Reifegradverfahren, as it is called, so the majority of the project relates to whether they receive grid capacity or not. And from our experience, that is then also used on a DSO level more frequently as at least guidelines. But of course, a regulation, a clear, transparent law on that would help a lot going forward. Then we have advanced major projects early. That is to avoid change of law risks. Here, from the latest development, from our perspective, FID is essential to guarantee that we have a certain security under the current existing regime, and that BESS are not subject or not risk change of law. And of course, bankability increases not only for tolling only BESS, but also for merchant cases or mixed cases where we're seeing more and more project finance on those projects. Now, very happy to hand over to my colleagues Ramon and Gert from Spain and the Netherlands. Please.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Very interesting. You have told us about the common problems in the BESS, not only applicable to Germany, of course, you are specializing, but also in all the European network and all the European jurisdictions. I would like to spend the next few minutes explaining why battery energy storage systems are becoming. We can go through the next slide. Yes, are becoming central to the European strategy and energy transition. I will focus on 4 points. First, the European Green Deal, the RED 2, the RED 3, and third, the new batteries regulation, and at last, the reform of the EU electricity market design. Talking about the Green Deal, all people in the in the webinar knows that the Green Deal is the European Union's strategy to make its economic climate neutral by 2050. But this is more than environmental policy. It combines energy transition, industrial policy, security of supply, innovation, sustainability, and competitiveness. For BESS, this is very important because the Green Deal is built on the idea that the Europe needs much more renewable energy. But renewable energy is variable. Solar, we have here in Spain a lot of resources in solar, does not produce at night, and wind doesn't always blow. So this is the point where the batteries become central. So under the Green Deal, batteries are not just an accessory to renewables. They are critical part of the infrastructure that allows renewables to scale. This is the reason because we focus after this in RED 2 and RED 3. RED 2 was very important because it accelerates development of the renewable energy across the EU. However, BESS was only considered indirectly. RED 3 goes further. RED 3 reflects a more mature view of the energy system, and it was very important for RED 3 to say that the system also needs flexibility, grid integration, and faster permitting. This is where battery become much more visible. It also supports the practical development of the collocation and the hybrid project, where batteries are installed together with renewable generation. For example, here in Spain, very common is solar PV plus BESS. And this is important for developers and investors because collocation can reduce curtailment, of course, make better use of the grid connection capacity. You don't need probably a new connection point is quite difficult here in Spain, and this is the reason because in the previous slide, the Spain was in orange in this point because we are, of course, we have the same problem of capacity here in Spain that affects to the consume and demand consumers, but we have this opportunity of every connection projects that may relieve some cost and the difficulty of obtaining a connection permit. Um, so, of course, can reduce curtailment, make better use of the grid connection capacity, and improve the revenue profile of our renewable assets. Just going forward to the regulation of regulation in EU on batteries, and that was the first point I would like to talk about. And this regulation is very relevant, and because it applies broadly to the batteries, to all batteries placed on the EU market. Of course, we are talking, and it applies, of course, to the BESS. The main idea is simple. If batteries are going to be central to the energy transition, they must also be sustainable, traceable, and safe. So remember, these were one of the purpose of the Green Day that I have told before. The regulation looks at a full life cycles of batteries. I mean, it's important that investor and lenders has to ask questions such as where do the batteries came from, what is their carbon footprint, are they compliant with the EU sustainability rules, can the materials be traced, what happens at the end of the life, of course, and who is the responsible of recycling and waste obligation. This is important because this project may have a strong revenue model, as Daniel has told before, but if the battery supply chain is not compliant, the project can face regulatory, reputational, and at last financing risk. And the last point I would like to talk about is about the EU electricity market reform that surged and was drafted after the 2022 energy crisis, where electricity prices were strongly affected by the fossil fuel prices, especially gas. Here in Spain, we have a special experience on this because of the exception, the Iberian exception, going forward by the actual commissioner in the UE. The goal of the reform is not to eliminate market pricing, but to reduce excessive exposure to the fuel price. Sorry. For BESS, this matters because storage needs a clear investment case. Batteries usually do not rely on one single revenue stream. They may include wholesale arbitrage, shorter trading intervals, including quarter-hour market that has now been implemented in Spain, ancillary services, balancing services, capacity market revenue that is now going forward here in Spain because the EU Commission has approved the Spanish mechanism for 10 years, tolling agreement that Daniel has talked about this, and of course, the cut cost of reducing curtailment and supporting long-term offtake structure. And this is one point that the reform of the market in the EU is critical because this reform supports tools as PPAs and also contracts for difference that these tools indirect affect the best project because the imbalance risk, for example, in PPA, the PPA may improve the imbalance risk in a renewable assets, and similarly, this contract for difference supported renewable project may benefit from storage if storage helps optimize production and reduce wasted energy. So the market reform is relevant for BESS because it supports a more stable investment environment. To conclude, the UO framework is moving in a clear direction, in our opinion, and but for developers, the opportunity is significant, but success will depend on combining technical performance, regulatory compliance, sustainability, grid access, and of course, a credible revenue strategy. And that's all for the EU Green Deal. And please to hand over to Grid and just to talk about that connection and Chris.
Thank you, Ramon, and good morning, everyone. My name is Geert de Nijs, which is unpronounceable for non-Dutch, but that's okay. I'm a corporate partner in the Amsterdam office, mostly focused on energy transactions and also energy regulatory aspects. Just going to keep it brief. Netherlands remains a very challenging market in sense of grid congestion. So it basically has resulted currently in any developments coming to a halt nationally. We have 14,000 companies, so 4,000 companies on the waiting list for either getting a connection or a capacity increase. Annual damages are estimated, so societal damages, somewhere between 8 and 40 billion annually. The new government announced a Congestion Crisis Act in its coalition agreement of January this year. And we got a little bit more information in a letter recently by the government. So the Crisis Act will be more of a set of various legislative amendments, which will take place in various tranches. And the aim is to, well, obviously expedite permitting process, congestion measures, making more efficient use of available land, and increasing efficient use of the current grid capacity. The first tranche has been published for public consultation in April, and that's now closed, and is limited to mostly technical legislative changes. There's one major change, if you would call it major, and that is that instead of charging fixed levies by both the national government or provinces for any energy projects, permitting processes, the government or the provinces can now also enter into a commercial agreement with those parties to make more tailor-made agreements regarding to the energy project. First tranche, well, I said public consultation is now closed, and it's expected to be discussed in Parliament in the autumn of this year. In the meantime, I don't think we're sitting still. So we have some other measures taking place. First of all, is well basically squeezing out as much of the available capacity on the grid as is possible by off-peak contracting, cable pooling, and group transport agreements, and some other measures. For instance, societal prioritization. First of in the beginning, there was a first come first serve principle for waiting list, but now it's some categories have have prioritization, and BESS is one of those congestion measures which has the highest priority on the waiting list. And second and last, we have energy hubs developing, so that's basically self-sufficient commercial locations, not being needing to use any capacity available on the grid. And that's all.
Yes, going back to see, going back to Spain. I would like to talk how is the landscape of BESS here in Spain, and this is critical after the incident that we had in April of 2025, the general blackout, very famous all abroad Europe, and this is added to the point out to the fact that Spain is one of the most attractive European markets for storage, has a very strong renewable resources, a large solar pipeline, increasing grid congestion and a growing need for flexibility. And why BESS matters in Spain? First, for reasons of resilience. After the general blackout, we don't have to talk anything more about it. The debate in Spain changed about batteries. They are critical just to sustain the renewable penetration, large renewable penetration here in Spain. The second point, the first was resilience. The second point is curtailment. Spain is adding large volumes of renewable energy, especially solar, as said before. But if the grid cannot absorb all the electricity when it is produced, part of that clean energy is simply lost. We cannot afford this issue. And the third point is the price risk. And this point has also been touched by Daniel before, but the more solar production during the same hours can create price cannibalization, and we have also a very common scenarios of negative price now cut until the €0, but it was critical for a lot of projects of renewables. After the blackout, Spain government has assumed or has launched several regulatory initiatives. One of them is the Royal Decree 7 2026, and that support the hybridization storage. We have accelerated zones for the permitting, and we have more accelerated permitting itself, and reconnection is one of the most valuable parts of the project. So if we are in a hybrid scenario, you can relieve this cost and this difficulty to obtain this connection point that is critical for the project. Um, and also, this royal decree approaches a practical point on shared evacuation. You can the BESS project can be helped by the evacuation infrastructure of the renewable project, and of course, hybridization is the champions now here in Spain. The other point or the other leg of the regulatory improvements here in Spain is the approbation of the Spanish capacity mechanism at last for the European Commission. And this is the second major development, and this mechanism has an expected budget of look at the number 900 million euros per year and over 10 years. This is very important for BESS bankability. This mechanism rewards assets not simply for how many megawatt hour they produce, the projects, but for being available when the system needs them. Transparent auction based on availability, reduce reliance on purely merchant revenues. But it's important to regulate in a specific way how the action will be designed, which battery will be eligible, whether both standalone and hybrid BESS can participate, how long the capacity contract will last, what happens if a battery is not available when called, how penalties will be calculated. And another point to be developed here, talking about BESS, is the flexible access. This is now on the table of the regulator, Spanish regulator, and is expected to be approved in several months. But it's quite critical for standalone batteries, and Spain still needs more detailed regulation from the regulator on how flexible access will work in practice. And the third pending issue, in my opinion, is the cybersecurity. BESS assets are highly digital assets. They depend on remote control, software, SCADA design, communication with grid operators, and was a critical point in the general blackout in Spain last year, and a fast response to dispatch instruction. Batteries can safely receive and execute instruction from the TCO or the DCO, and that means strong cybersecurity, reliable communication, and clear operational protocol. Well, Michael is going to talk about this after, but here in Spain, Spain still needs to complete the full fulfillment of the NIS 2 framework. This is not transposed absolutely, and look, this is a very important, critical. One of the first questions investigated during the blackout incident was whether the incident could have been caused by a cyber attack. It was discarded, but it was a critical point, the first point that the Spanish government looked at. For BESS developers, this means cybersecurity should be built into the project from the beginning. It should be reflected in the EPC contract, the operation and management contract, the SCADA design, supplier access, software updates, incident response, and data management at all. So in plain terms, if batteries are going to help establish the grid, the control system behind those batteries must also be secure at last. That's all from Spain right now.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Very interesting. I quickly jump and very short from my side. We've talked about all these points, 4 common barriers to BESS, and it's very interesting to hear from the colleagues in the Netherlands and Spain that a lot of those points are kind of similar, and I can also assure that from Germany, grid congestions we've talked about is one of the biggest topics, but we're seeing a development. Also heard from the Netherlands from first come, first served to first set, ready, first connected. In the UK, we have that already. Germany partially. Netherlands has something like that. Infrastructure security, one big topic. Regulatory uncertainty. We've heard that nearly all jurisdictions, we still need to fulfill and still need a reliable regulatory framework, and the unclear market saturation timeline. How long are BESS still at the full of the merchant capacity they can reach, and when will market saturation take place? I've talked about that earlier. Having said that, I'm happy to hand over to Michael directly for the topic that Ramon already touched upon, and which is one of the essential points with regard to BESS. It's the cybersecurity and data topics around BESS.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. So as Ramon has said, a modern BESS project is networked, software controlled, and cloud connected. And it will have battery and energy management systems, power conversion systems, remote monitoring tools, and of course, all of the networking equipment and technology to connect it all up. Now, these are all attack surfaces that open up BESS providers to a world of cybersecurity risk. Could be ransomware attacks, so organized criminals might want to lock up your systems and extort a ransom payment, or it could be state-backed hackers seeking to cause outages, damage, or even thermal runaways. Now, any of these incidents could have dramatic and drastic commercial consequences, with third-party claims, loss of contracts or customer confidence, repair and remediation costs, investigation costs, and much more besides. In the UK, nearly half of all incidents in 2025 that required support from the UK National Cybersecurity Centre related to critical national infrastructure. And the NCSC reported just yesterday that 3/4 of the 200 attacks on critical national infrastructure over the past 12 months were linked to state actors. And that is a particular risk for BESS projects. And as a result of all of that, the regulatory landscape is changing. The energy sector has been regulated in the UK and the EU for many years under the first Network and Information Systems Directive. But that was fairly light touch. The regulators have put out guidance, but what we're seeing now is a step change in the level of cybersecurity regulation. Currently, the UK Parliament is working through a draft Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill that is expected to become law within the next 6 to 12 months and will enhance regulatory oversight and the standards required of the energy sector. Most EU member states have by now implemented NIS2 that impose a wide range of governance, supply chain, and information security requirements onto in-scope entities. And this includes now Austria and Portugal as a slight development since our maturity index slide. So NIS2, it introduces management liability for cybersecurity compliance failures, so executives can be on the hook. There's proactive regulatory powers to undertake audits and then suspend services and even suspend executives from their roles if the requirements have not been met. Now, this is a key shift from the GDPR and NIS1 style approach of punishing a business after it's already had a significant incident to proactive controls, trying to put in place the right protections and hold providers to account before an incident can occur. So it's therefore crucial to treat BESS projects as critical national infrastructure and design them to meet the NIS2 and UK regulatory requirements. It is much easier to implement compliant governance and supply chain measures at the outset of a project rather than reverse engineering your arrangements and having to remediate contracts and put in new solutions or processes at a later date. Now, some of the key changes driven by NIS2 are the registration, record keeping, and audit requirements, which mean it is not just important to do the right thing, but also to demonstrate that you're doing the right thing. So cyber threats are a part of life, and cybersecurity regulation is here to stay, and it's the same for BESS. So demonstrating your compliance and regulatory stance early will protect against those outages and third-party threats, and ultimately help demonstrate the long-term commercial viability of any BESS project. So I'll now hand over to Fabio and Giorgio to talk about Italy.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. Thanks, Daniel. We can switch to the first slide of our part that is not only an Italian part because we analyze under all the aspects the co-location of the project. I would start from the EU legal framework of co-located energy storage because under RED 2, as amended by RED 3, the EU legislator expressly recognizes the concept of co-located energy storage. And what is a co-located energy storage? Under the EU law, it means that the energy storage facility is combined with a renewable energy plant and connected to the same grid access point. So the definition demonstrates that for the EU law, EU legislator, co-location is not only being physically close to a solar or a wind plant, but is a functional link with a renewable plant and a shared access point to the grid. This is, of course, the EU legislation, and then under any EU member state, it can be transposed slightly differently the definition. For example, in Italy, it has been included under the wider definition of hybrid plants that creates also some problems and under authorization aspect. But in any case, this is the European definition. This European definition is important because demonstrate that the the legislator, the Europe wants more renewable energy, but more renewable energy means more intermittency, more pressure on the grid, and more need for also flexibility. So storage is one of the means that can solve or reduce the problem. But RED 3 does not only define the permitting framework, but also support the creation of co-located project. First, for example, with the introduction of renewable acceleration areas and the possibility to create and speed up the process if co-located storage plants are included in the renewable acceleration areas, and the provision of accelerated permitting process that cannot exceed between 6 months and 12 months, depending on the case, for the permitting procedure for co-located storage included in renewable acceleration area. Another point under which we can analyze the incentive, the support of the EU legislator for co-located project is that RED 3 gives special treatment to solar equipment and co-located storage on existing future artificial structure, for example, rooftop, for example, parking areas, and so on. And this is another EU legislator signal that is saying that if we use artificial or already developed site and we combine it with renewable and storage, then the permitting should be faster and simpler. So coming to the first practical point that we highlighted in the slide, that is reusing existing grid connection to bypass long queues. As my colleague said, one of maybe the most important problem in all the European countries is grid congestion, and that is the main bottleneck for BESS. Italy is a very clear example in this way because, as you know, renewable production is mainly concentrated in the south, while demand is mainly in the north. So this creates structural pressure on the transmission system. Italy is responding with grid investment, with new connection rules that should came into force this year, but it's not sufficient, and co-location can help because it uses existing or already planned grid access point more efficiently. The second point we highlighted is the reduction of curtailment. Curtailment is renewable energy not produced or reduced because the grid cannot absorb or because the system condition require it. So the plant is technically able to produce electricity, but the system does not allow it. And without storage, this will be energy lost. With a co-located battery, it can be stored and used later. So in the report, we mentioned also Aurora Energy analysis that says that the revenues can be increased by 8 to 25% under co-located project. And this is one of the reason, the reduction of curtailment. And reduction of curtailment, of course, is one of the elements that can improve the bankability of the project. The bankability of the project it is not only having good revenues, but is also something about predictability. So co-location can improve bankability, not only about improving predictability, but also reducing the infrastructure and so the capex of the infrastructure. If the renewable plant and the BESS share land, roads, cables, substation, of course, this can reduce capex and reduce development risk. And finally, the final point is footprint and reduce footprint and objections by building on existing sites. Of course, as we saw under the EU legislation, it is incentivized the use of sites that are already used for energy production or for other industrial use, and this is one of the other point that we can highlight for storage plants. If Daniel agree, the second slide is it regards Italian elements that I would say in just 2 words because the time is very limited and we have another part. The Italian problems are the problems common to all European countries that we have already highlighted. These are the numbers that are foreseen of new production by 2030. The cuts curtailment, as you can see, that is foreseen to reach 2 terawatt by 2030. So these are numbers that, and for example, I can repeat, balances northern demand with southern renewable output. So these are all elements and numbers that highlight the importance of co-location for Italian market. That now in this moment is not so well defined, especially because there still are authorization and permitting procedure aspect that have to be clarified by the legislator. Thanks, Daniel. You can switch to the other slide.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and also common themes again across Europe. I'm now handing over to Jamie, who will talk about some litigation topics around BESS, some growing litigation topics. The floor is yours, Jamie. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. And good morning, all. I'm Jamie Key. I'm a partner in our UK office based in London. So very briefly, just going to talk about some of the trends we're seeing in relation to BESS projects. So my expertise is on the construction side. And what we have seen in the UK is, unfortunately, an upward trend in the growth of litigation on these projects. And you might think that's a natural course of events given the volume of projects that have increased, but we don't think it's just the volume of projects that has caused the number of disputes to increase. It's also the nature of the projects themselves. And there's a couple of themes that we have seen specifically that just seem to create more litigation, unfortunately, in BESS projects. Two sort of in particular to mention. One is that whilst some developers are experts in this, we're still seeing more players come into the market, right from developer through to all the way down the supply chain. More new entrants to the market mean more people are learning as they go, which creates more uncertainty. And the other one, the other big side is, has been mentioned throughout this webinar, issues with grid connection and how that plays into expected delivery, timeframes, project returns, etc. These things being factored in, causing issues, and we're just seeing more disputes. There's on the slide. There's a couple of things that almost lessons learned from some of the disputes, and some thoughts about how obviously you'd want your projects to try and avoid these disputes escalating, whether in the UK or in other jurisdictions. We'd envisage similar issues arising to what we've already seen so far, and specifically looking at enforcing the BESS specific standards that you've got in your supply contracts, and by that I mean making sure that risk is placed on the right entity. So if you are contracting with a new player in the market, are they best placed to take that specific BESS risk? Do they even know? Do they have the supply chain below them? Or are we just looking to pass risk on to somebody that actually isn't going to manage that as best as they could? Look at milestones, time payments in, and clear performance tests. There is a tendency in the UK to have the risk all associated at the end, so a delayed completion, you may want to intervene much sooner as a BESS developer. You might have far more expertise than the specific UK contractor that's entering into the market. So tie more milestones in potentially is something to look at. The third point there as well is the pre-approved suppliers where possible. That's obviously the golden. If you've got pre-approved suppliers already in the market, the reality is in order to deliver the number of BESS projects we're seeing, there has to be new people coming into the market. And how you then smartly contract with them. Can you limit scope of work? Can you take more risk? Can some of the more specialist BESS elements be placed with others, or in fact held in a different way? That those would all help and alleviate some of the issues we've had. It's very normal in the UK to use standard form construction contracts. We'd suggest they do need to be tailored to the BESS projects. That could have avoided some of the issues we've seen. Be really specific in when you're expecting battery warranties or who's taking transport risks. Have those discussions up front, place those risks clearly, and make sure your key supply chain understand they're holding those risks rather than just having the big fight at the end. And then it's the management side as well in terms of it's fantastic to place all the risk here, but actually is that going to deliver your project successfully? Very whistle stop tour. It's more a headlight and a shining light that we've seen a lot of BESS projects, but it's bringing with it perhaps a disproportionate amount of disputes on those projects on the construction side. So on that note, I will hand back to Daniel to wrap back up.
Thank you very much. Very good insight, very good points to look at. Yeah, I think we've taken all the time which shows that a lot of topics to talk about, and of course we only could touch on headlines in that format in an hour, given also the various jurisdictions and country that we had colleagues here from Fieldfisher. I again want to draw your attention to our BESS report, which has been issued, which covers 11 jurisdictions. Within Fieldfisher, we have 28 offices in 14 countries, so we can help you across Europe with all your issues relating to BESS or other renewable projects. And it would be a pleasure for us if you get in contact with us, and we're very happy to help here and to share the experience. We have highlighted here a couple of people in various countries, so you see that there are specific people in our offices who deal with those topics. And of course, we are very happy to point you in the right direction, to introduce you to the right person for your questions in the specific jurisdictions you're looking at. Thank you. I don't think we have time for questions because we're already 3 minutes over, but we will collect the questions, or you can send us your questions later on via email, and we'll do our best to answer them in the most conclusive way that we are able to, or get into a discussion with you on those kind of questions. Yes, please get in contact if you have for anything. And thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Thanks to all the speakers who taken the time and prepared this webinar, and also participated in the BESS report, and very much looking forward to further conversations. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You will. Okay.